Alright, y'all, so now let's look at the man who, according to the Bible, was the forefather of the ancient Egyptians. And once again, this is just going to give us a better understanding of why the people of ancient Egypt referred to their land as quote-unquote Kemet, which for those of you who don't know means the black land. When you do research on why that moniker of the black land was given to the land that we know today as Egypt, you'll find that it's the assertion of most quote-unquote historians that the people of ancient Egypt called their land Kemet, or the black land, because of the fertility or the black soil of the land that came from the Nile River. But my contention is that the people of ancient Kemet, or the Kemites per se, called themselves in the land that they inhabited they called the land that they inhabited Kemet because they thought of themselves to be the living physical embodiments of their ancestor Ham, much like how a father or a parent's children would look like them and would take on their likeness physically, right? That's how the people of ancient Kemet saw themselves in relation to their forefather Ham or Kim. So the land of Kemet, or the land of Kim, which was another word for Ham, spelled Khem, is where the word Kemet itself comes from, and it basically just means the land of the children of Kim. Okay, but let's just take a look at what the origins of the name of Ham are and how it correlates with the land of ancient Kemet. Alright, so now this is the blueletter.com's definition of the name Ham, and this is just going to give us various meanings of the name Ham and how it was originally defined. So now let's just start at the top. So we see at the very top the original pronunciation of the name Ham, and then as we read down a little bit further, this is the first definition, and as we can see, it states that the name Ham means quote-unquote hot. Now this definition will make more sense as we go along, but for now let's just read down. So again, we see under Strong's Concordance definition that Ham or Kam means hot, and then it gives yet another form of Ham's name that I referenced earlier, which is Kam, and then it says a son of Noah, also as a patronymic, which the word patronymic means a name that is derived from a forefather or an ancestor. Okay, so the name Kam or Ham was a word that was applied to his descendants, to Ham's descendants, as it even states right here at the end of this definition, which states his descendants or their country. Okay, so what this is basically telling us is that Ham or Kam was given to his descendants to denote that they were indeed his progeny. So therefore, people that descended from Ham were known colloquially as the Hamites, or even the Kemites. And then in the case of the ancient Egyptians, they were known as the Kemites, right? So let's just read down a little bit further. So now let's read this paragraph right here. So a name of Egypt, properly its domestic name amongst the Egyptians themselves, but however so inflected that the Hebrews supposed Ham, the son of Noah, to have been the ancestor of the Egyptians among other nations. This, of course, was the simple fact if we are to believe what God has revealed. And then it gives Bible verses, Psalms 78, 51, Psalms 105, 23, 27, 106, 22. And then the name of Egypt in the more recent Coptic tongue is written in this form right here. And then in the Sahidic tongue, it's written in this form right here. Words which signify blackness and heat, as Plutarch observed, and then it gives the name of his book, and which is according to their Coptic etymology, in which this word right here, this form right here, signifies black, hot, or heat. In the hieroglyphic language, it is written with the two letters K and M. Egypt is so named likewise in the Rosetta inscription, in which this word occurs more than 10 times, and is read by Champollion. So we see in the first sentence, it states that Ham was the ancestor of the Egyptians. And then it goes on to define Ham in the Coptic and Sahidic tongue, in the Coptic and Sahidic languages, which for those of you who don't know, the Coptic and Sahidic languages are just two relatively modern forms of the ancient Egyptian language. And then it states that Ham or Kam was a word that signified quote-unquote blackness and heat. Okay, and then it reinforces that Kam meant black or hot / heat at the end of the sentence. And then once again, we're going to see very soon why Kam or Ham's name was associated with being black or hot, and how it relates to the people who descended from Ham and lived in Egypt. Okay, but just lastly, reading on, we see here that In the more ancient hieroglyphic language that the ancient Egyptians spoke, the way Ham or Kum is written out was KM, which also meant black. Okay, so that was the original form of the name Kim. According to the ancient Egyptians, they wrote it out as the letters K and M, which once again signified black. Okay, so now let's just move on and take a look at something else. All right, so we're still on the Blue Letter Bible website with yet another version of Ham's name. And we can see at the very top, Ham's name is written out as Cam, spelled Cham. And then the first definition talks about Ham being the youngest son of Noah. And when we move down to the second definition, we see these contrived definitions from, I believe it's the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, that try to define the three sons of Noah's names to mean different colors, based off of the premise that since Ham's name means quote-unquote black, i.e. black Africans, then Shem, who was looked at as the ancestor of the quote-unquote Orientals or Asiatics, his name must mean dusky, which is a word that has been reduced to mean a dark-skinned Middle Eastern person or dark-skinned Middle Eastern people. And then Japheth or Yepeth, who allegedly is the forefather of the so-called Caucasian Europeans, his name means fair to indicate fair skin. But first of all, the name Yepeth, as it's pronounced in the original Hebrew language, means opened, not fair. And then the name Shem or Sem, which is where you get the term Semitic from, means name or renown. Okay, not dusky, because the name Shem will be one of great renown due to him being the forefather of the chosen nation of the Most High. Okay, so the only name amongst the three sons of Noah that indicates color is Ham or Cam, or as we read down to the meaning of the paragraph section, the name Ham is connected to the word Kem, which I believe I already stated is where the true ancient name for the land of Egypt that the ancient Egyptians called Kemet comes from. Okay, so Kem is Ham, and the land of Kemet is the land of Ham, or the land of the descendants of Ham. So now let's move on. So here's yet another definition of Ham from Smith's Bible Dictionary, and at the very top we see Ham being associated with the word quote unquote hot again. Okay, but next to that is the word sunburnt. And so this is very revelatory when it comes to the definition of Ham. And I will expand on what it means and why it's associated with Ham in a little bit. But I just wanted to show that the name Ham is defined also to mean quote unquote sunburnt. Okay, so now let's get a better understanding of why quote unquote sunburnt is associated with Ham and what it's meant to imply. So now, according to the ATS Bible Dictionary, Ham is defined as burnt, swarthy, and black. Okay, so now swarthy is a word that I've gone over a myriad of times on this channel. And so for the ones that know what this term means, it's a word that has always meant someone's skin color being very dark or having a very dark to really black skin complexion. Okay, which is why the word black is even beside swarthy. So Ham, meaning burnt or sunburnt, was meant to indicate that Ham's skin color was very dark or swarthy or even quote unquote black. And that is due to his skin being quote unquote burnt by the sun. And you know what? This is something that has always been understood about black African skin being dark or darkened because of their exposure to the sun from now and then even going all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Okay, and the word that they used for so-called black Africans, which means sunburnt or burnt-faced, was a word that was applied to them. Okay, but I'll be going over that term in a little bit because it does have a correlation with Ham and his descendants, more specifically one of Ham's sons. Okay, but once again, we'll go over that a little bit later. So, but for now, let's look at a couple more sources that define Ham's name to mean swarthy. So now this is a very heavily used and cited from biblical dictionary written by the English theologian, scholar, and lexicographer William Smith. And as we can see from William Smith's dictionary, again, Ham's name is associated with the word swarthy, which is once again a word that indicates skin color. So please remember that as we move forward. But reading on, we see once again Ham means to be warm or to be hot, i.e. to be sunburnt, right? And then it states that Kim is the Egyptian equivalent of Ham. So once again, Kemet, or the people of Kemet, are the children of Ham, and they called themselves and their land this word because it was the land of Ham or Kim, and they themselves were the living embodiments of their forefather Ham or Kim, especially when it came to their physical appearance, i.e. their skin color and what they looked like, which is something that we're starting to figure out right now. But just reading on, it states Ham or Kim is an adjective that signifies black, implying warmth or blackness, again associating the heat or the warmth that derived from the hot sun or hot climate of Africa that contributed to the dark but really black skin of Ham. And then the last sentence we'll read out of this dictionary states, if the Hebrew and Egyptian words be the same, Ham must mean the swarthy or sunburnt, like, and then I'll go over this Greek word a little bit later right here. But reading on, which has been derived from the Coptic name of Ethiopia, but which we should be inclined to trace to a boundary unless the Sahidic form may be derived from Kush or Kush. So now for those of you who don't know what this Greek word is right here, that I mentioned like a minute ago, I'll explain. This is the original Greek form of the word Ethiops, and this was the word that I alluded to a little bit ago when I stated that the ancient Greeks had a term that was similar to Ham or Kim that was meant to indicate an African or a Negro. And so what William Smith is basically stating in his dictionary definition of the name Ham is that Ham and Ethiops have pretty much the same meaning, which, you know, they both mean swarthy and sunburnt. What you'll notice when I compare these two terms is the similarities that exist between them, the words Ham and Ethiops, and how they both are defined to mean quote-unquote sunburnt, and that they are both likewise patronymics, or words that derive from a patriarchal ancestor. Of course, one of the names being Kim, which is another form of the name Ham, and then Ethiops being another form of the name for one of the sons of Ham, who was known as Kush. Okay, another name for Kush was Ethiopia, which is where we get the term Ethiopian or Ethiops from. But once again, we'll take a look at that in greater detail later on. But let's move on. And look at another definition of Ham. So the same thing can be seen here. Again, Ham's name is defined as burnt, swarthy, black. And then as we read down, we can see the various sons and nations that descended from Ham, where it states Ham was the father of Kush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan, i.e. the ancestor of the Ethiopians, Egyptians. And then this last sentence right here states that Ham was the forefather of the Africans in general. So what needs to be understood is that all of these nations that are listed, from the Canaanites to the Ethiopians to the Egyptians, they were all what we would call today black African peoples. But the proper name for them, according to their tribal name, would be so-called black Hamitic peoples, since they, for number one, were all descendants of Ham, and then for number two, not all of them derived or resided in Africa. Okay, but they all were what we would call black or black-skinned people. And just to refer back to a statement that I made in my last video, out of all these different nations and tribes, none of them are where these so-called black men and black women of the Americas descend from. All right, for you brothers and sisters who believe that we out here descend from the ancient Egyptians just because they were so-called black. What you guys have to understand, and as I've already stated, I believe in my last video, we come from a similar stock as the ancient Egyptians, meaning our lineage is similar to theirs because, like them, we are the direct descendants of Noah through one of his three sons, which is why our people have always tended to look very similar to the so-called Africans, and were even documented in the scriptures as looking pretty much indistinguishable from the Africans, particularly the ancient Egyptians, multiple times all throughout the Bible. Okay, but that will be something that I go over very soon, probably in the next video. But just to cap this off, let's just look at one last definition of Ham. This is going to be the very last definition that I show for the name Ham, and like we've seen consistently in every biblical dictionary that I've cited from, Ham's name is defined as hot or dark colored. Okay, dark colored, i.e. dark skin complexion. Swarthy, again, we see swarthy. And then when we go down, let's look at this paragraph. It talks about how Ham means hot, and how it's prophetic of the climate that created the black skin of the Negro. So once again, Ham being referred to as sunburnt or hot is an allusion to Ham being a very dark-skinned African man, and his skin being darkened by the sun, just like how black Africans have always been associated with darker skin pigmentation in comparison to every other ethnic group or race due to them being exposed to the sun. But the author of this book, I believe his name is Herbert Lockyer, tries to kind of disassociate the other nations that descended from Ham from being black-skinned people in the second part of this sentence. But as I've stated before, and as I will go over in other video series down the line, all of the descendants of Ham were what we would call today black or black Negro African peoples. Okay, and then moving on, it states that Egypt is the land of Ham, and it even cites the scripture where that's mentioned. So once again, another name for Ham is what? It's Kem, right? And then the ancient name for Egypt by the Egyptians, or that was created by the ancient Egyptians, was Kemet, which derived from the ancient Egyptian name for Ham, which once again was Kem. And Kemet is said to mean the black land, which allegedly is only in reference to the soil of the land that was very dark or black in color because of the fertilization it received from the Nile River, and not from the skin color of the people who inhabited the country. But as we've already seen, Kem, of course, means black, but it also means sunburnt. It means swarthy. It means dark colored. All words that imply someone's skin color being very dark and even black. So with this understanding, we can come to the conclusion that the people of Kemet, who were also known as Kemites, who applied that name to themselves to hint at or indicate that they were the descendants and living personifications of their forefather Ham or Kem, did so because, once again, they looked a lot like their forefather Ham in terms of physical appearance, especially when it came to their skin color, much like how the offspring of a father would look like him. So it's safe to say that the inhabitants of the land of Kemet, the black or swarthy land, were so-called black African people themselves, and that's why they refer to their land as such. That's why they refer to their land as Kemet. And then lastly, it lists the various nations that descended from Ham again. And as I already stated, all these nations were so-called black Africans, or what we would call today, quote-unquote, African peoples. So that concludes this segment of this video. So now I just want to refer back to a sentiment that I made earlier on in this video about the supposed definition of the names of Ham's brothers indicating color. If you guys remember, the definitions that I cited from in the Blue Letter Bible website was Shem's name meaning dusky or like a light brownish skin complexion, and Japheth or Yepeth meaning fair, which obviously means light to pale skin. And as I've already stated, those definitions for Shem and Japheth's name are not correct, but I would like to take a look at a chart that was created a little bit ago that depicts the three sons of Noah and what they have been alleged to have looked like. So now some of you who are watching this video may have seen this chart already, but I would just like to take a look at and evaluate some things that can be gleaned from it. So for number one, we can clearly see that Ham is depicted as a very black or dark-skinned individual. And guys, this is what descendants of Ham would have all came out looking like. All of them were black-skinned people like this chart shows Ham to be, which of course, some of them may have had varying shades of brown skin color that could stem from a very dark brown to even a very light brown. But for the most part, they were all black-skinned Negro peoples. Okay, and so now we should have a greater understanding of why the ancient Egyptians called themselves Kemites or Kemetic peoples. And it's obviously not because of the land having black soil. It's obviously because they were black or very, very dark-skinned, just like their antecedent here, Kem or Ham, which, just to reiterate, means black, swarthy, and sunburnt, or skin that's been burnt by the sun to the point where it's become very, very dark. Okay, so that's number one. But secondly, the way Shem, Ham, and Japheth are depicted here is not historically accurate at all whatsoever. I'll say the way Japheth and Shem are depicted in this chart is not historically accurate because both Shem and Japheth should be depicted as so-called black men. Probably not as dark-skinned as Ham, but they were so-called black men nonetheless. and you can kind of see the so-called black features that are still left in these obviously altered images of Shem and Japheth. Japheth appears to have a braid slash cornrow hairstyle, and Shem appears to have an afro-like hairstyle. But we will address this in a minute, because as I stated earlier, all throughout the scriptures, the Israelites, who of course were of the tribe of Sem or Shem, were commonly mistaken for Egyptians multiple times. But we'll take a look at that when we get to it. But yeah, just the fact that Ham is clearly depicted as a so-called black man is an admission that his descendants had to have been so-called black themselves. And of course, this includes the ancient Egyptians or Kemetic peoples. So once again, the people who descended from Ham or Kim were black or Negro peoples, just like him. But just to double down on this, I want to take a look at another word that I referenced earlier, which has a similar, if not an identical meaning to the name Ham or Kim. And it was used as a designation for a certain group of people, just like the name Kim was applied to the people of Kemet to indicate that their forefather was Ham or Kim. And just like the name Kim, this particular word means black, and was meant to indicate that the people who this name was given to were black-skinned or even sunburnt. Okay, this word, of course, is the word Ethiops, which I already referenced was another name for a son of Ham, that being Kush. So let's just take a look at the word Kush. So now we're back on the Blue Letter Bible site, and what's being shown right now is the original Hebrew form of the word Ethiopia. And when we look atop here, we can see that the original pronunciation is Kush. And then as we go down, we see the word Kush yet again. And what does it mean? It means black. So once again, I just want you guys to keep in mind that this word is going to have an identical meaning to Kim. The word Kush is going to have an identical meaning to Kim or Ham, and how it's defined. And we're going to see just how much of a parallel exists between these two words, Ham and Kush. And how both of these terms are meant to allude to the physical appearance of the nation of people they were applied to. But let's continue on down. So under Strong's definition, we see that Kush was the son of Ham, and that there was a group of people who descended from Kush. And for those of you who don't know, they were known as the quote-unquote Kushites. And we're going to take a look at what those people look like a little bit later on, when we see who the true descendants of the ancient Egyptians are today. But going down, we see Kush is equated to Ethiopia. So Kush is where we get the word Ethiopia from. And the people who were referred to as Ethiopians, or the inhabitants of the southern parts of the Nile or Upper Egypt, were also known as Kushites. Okay, so now let's move on and get an even deeper understanding of the name Kush. So now this is yet another online biblical concordance. So now let's see how this website defines the word Kush. So we see again that Kush in another form is Ethiopia, and then it lists all of the Bible verses that Kush is rendered to be Ethiopia. And then going down, this implies that the Ethiopians were also associated with Kush, and then it lists the Bible verses where that's seen in the scriptures. And then the last sentence states that Kush was the name of two men, which for those of you who don't know, there was another Kush besides the Kush that I'm referencing, that's mentioned in the Bible, who was of the Israelite tribe of Benjamin. Okay, but of course that's not who we're speaking about right now, so we don't have to worry about that. But reading on, it states that Kush is the name of the territory or territories occupied by the descendants of one of them, who of course, as we should already know and that should already be understood, is the Kush who was the son of Ham or Kim. So now let's go down a bit here. Let's start here at the land of Kush. So it states, Kush was the eldest son of Ham and is the one who the land of Kush renders its name from, which can also be translated to Ethiopia. But look here, it states that the German translator Luther, or Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation during the Renaissance time period, translated the land Kush or Ethiopia to mean moorland, which is the equivalent to Negro land or the land of the blacks. Okay, well, it states here the country of the blacks, but it's all pretty much the same thing, because it's just referencing the place where the descendants of Kush resided at. Okay, so but Martin Luther understood the land of Kush or Ethiopia to be a land that of course was inhabited by so-called black Africans. and then a native of Kush was called a Kushi, okay, which in the Greco-Roman language was equivalent to Ethiops, as it states right here in the text. So this would mean that the inhabitants of the land of Kush, who were the descendants of Kush, like what we just read in the very first entry, were what the Greeks and Romans called Ethiops. Okay, so we're going to transition into what the term Ethiops means in a little bit, but just to emphasize or to re-emphasize what is being said here, once again, we see that the land of Kush was also known as Negro land, and the land or country of the blacks, i.e. the black land, right? Just like how the land of ancient Kemet was also referred to as the quote-unquote black land. Okay, now one has to ask themselves why these two eponyms or place names are in alignment with one another in regards to what both of them mean, when one means a land that is inhabited by so-called black African people, and then the other word allegedly is just in reference to the land's soil being black because of how fertile it is, right? Remember, like I stated earlier, the name Kem was a patronymic that acted as a name for the Egyptians to denote that they, like their ancestor Ham, were a sunburnt, swarthy, and even black race, same as how the name Kush or Ethiops was a name that was given to the Ethiopians to denote that they were the descendants of Kush, and that they, like their ancestor Kush, and like the name Kush entails, were a sunburnt, black, or swarthy race of people. Just like the people of Kemet were also a sunburnt, black, swarthy race of people. Okay, but let's define even further what the word Ethiops means. So now we're back on the Blue Letter Bible website. So let's see how this defines Ethiops. And right off the bat, we see Ethiops, root word etymology, ethio, means to scorch or to burn. And ops means face. So in other words, burnt face. Once again, just like how Ham or Kem meant sunburnt. Then as we go down, we see Ethiops or an Ethiopian is equivalent to the word black. Just like how Kem was also equivalent to the word black, which is where you get the meaning of Kemet to be the black land from, right? So Ethiops means black, and then again under Strong's Concordance definition, Ethiops means to scorch or to burn the face, and then it states an Ethiopian is a blackamoor. Now the term blackamoor is a word that has always been a synonym for a Negro, combining both the terms black and Moor, both words that mean so-called black people. Okay, so the term Ethiops that was applied to the Ethiopians, who were the Kushites, were so-called black African Negroes. So now we can piece this together and come to the conclusion that for number one, the Greeks and the Romans, who were the inventors of this word Ethiops, used it to describe the Ethiopians, and they referred to them as such because they had very dark to really black skin color or skin complexion, and because they were a burnt-faced, i.e. sunburnt race of people. Just like the descendants of Ham or Kem or the Kemetic peoples per se were also a sunburnt race of people, just like their forefather who was the namesake of their race. Okay, so it's obvious that this term sunburnt was a word that was meant to indicate that someone or a group of people were what we would call today black, and that the moniker of sunburnt was applied to them to accentuate how dark-skinned they were. Okay, and please keep in mind that the Ethiopians or Kushites and the people of Kemet were both descendants of Ham. So it would only make sense that since they both come from the exact same ancestor and are essentially the same people, that they would look similar, if not exactly alike, to one another. Okay, so this is just even more confirmation that not only Ham and his Egyptian name Kem were meant to indicate that he was a very dark-skinned so-called black African man, but also his descendants, whether it be the Ethiopians, who again were a dark-skinned, sunburnt race of people, or the people of Kemet, who were also a dark-skinned, sunburnt race of people. Okay, but just to confirm that the people of Ethiopia or the Ethiopians were indeed so-called black Africans, let's just look at a few more definitions of Ethiops. So the definition that's given of Ethiops here we see is burned face, right, or sunburnt face. And then as we go down, this is interesting. It states Ethiops applied to the people living in Upper Egypt or beyond. Now, for those of you who don't know, Upper Egypt is oftentimes regarded as the place where some of the very first Egyptian pharaohs derived from and are even buried at. Guys like Pharaoh Menes and Hor-Aha and his son Jur. and so on and so forth. All 8 pharaohs in the very first Egyptian dynasty were all buried in Upper Egypt, and once again, they were all born in Upper Egypt. Okay, Upper Egypt was predominantly occupied by the more quote-unquote darker-skinned populations of Egypt, who are oftentimes associated with the quote-unquote Nubians, but we'll get into that later on when I talk about the pre-dynastic ancient Egyptian pharaohs. But again, we see Ethiopian and Negro being associated with the term Ethiops. So once again, an Ethiops was a so-called black African person. So now this is a Latin lexicon website, and if I haven't already mentioned it before, Ethiops was a term that was coined by the Greeks and then later on by the Romans. Okay, it was a term that was used by both the Greeks and the Romans, who of course the Romans, they spoke the Latin language. Okay, so this should give us an accurate understanding of what Ethiops meant or what Ethiops means. But let's read this. So Ethiops is first defined as an Ethiopian. Then the second definition states a black man and a Negro. Okay, so just to remind you guys, the dark-skinned, sunburnt Ethiops were so-called black Negroes, just as this definition states right here. And that's reinforced when we go down and see that it says Ethiops was applied to all of the sunburnt, dark complexion races above Egypt. Okay, so I just want to keep accentuating that term sunburnt because it was the exact same word that was used to describe Kim and his descendants, who we know as the people of ancient Kemet or the Kemites. So sunburnt, as it's defined, can apply to both the Ethiops and the people of ancient Kemet. And it was a word that was used to describe people of extremely dark skin complexion. So let's look at one last definition of Ethiops, and then we're going to wrap this segment up. So etymology.com defines Ethiops or Ethiop the same exact way. A Negro, a burnt-faced or sunburnt person, right? Once again, Negro and sunburnt are equivalent. So we pretty much get the point. Both Kim and Ethiops have the exact same definitions and are equivalent to one another, right? Just like what was said in the definition we saw earlier from William Smith that I'll pull back up just as a reminder. So I'll just read this again. So starting at this meaning seems to be confirmed by that of the Egyptian word Kim, Egypt, which we believe to be the equivalent of Ham, and which as an adjective signifies black, probably implying warmth as well as blackness. If the Hebrew and Egyptian words be the same, Ham must mean the swarthy or sunburnt, just like Ethiops. Okay, so once again, these two terms mean the exact same thing. And the reason for that is because both the Ethiops or Kushites and the Kemetic peoples or Kemites looked pretty indistinguishable from one another. Okay, so the people of ancient Kemet or Egypt were a quote-unquote black, swarthy, burnt-faced people, just like the Ethiops were a black, swarthy, burnt-faced people or sunburnt people. And as I stated, both the ancient Egyptians and the Ethiops or Kushites derived from the exact same ancestor, that being of course Ham. So they were both Hamites, and we'll take a look at what the term Hamite means in a little bit. But just to give you guys a visual representation of what these black sunburnt people looked like, I'll just show a few depictions of what the Ethiops or Kushites looked like. So here are some Kushite, i.e. Ethiopian warriors with the same black or sunburnt complexion. And then here's another depiction of the Ethiopians. And as I stated earlier, the Ethiopians weren't just coal black, but they came in varying shades of brown, much like how black Africans, but not even just so-called black Africans, but people all over the world who will be classified as quote-unquote black come in varying shades of brown as well. But the Ethiopians were still, of course, what we would call a black or so-called sunburnt or very dark-skinned race of people. So now this picture right here is very interesting because it depicts both Egyptian and Nubian soldiers. And the Nubians, if I haven't mentioned it already, even though I'm pretty sure I have, I'll just reiterate, but the Nubians were and are to this day regarded as a quote-unquote Cushitic race. Okay, so they were descendants of Kush, and will be classified as Ethiopians today. But just looking at this picture, as we can see, both the Egyptians and Nubians look pretty indistinguishable from one another. And then here's yet another depiction of ancient Egyptian and Nubian, i.e. Cushitic soldiers and mercenaries, where we can see that once again they look pretty indistinguishable from one another. And when you look at the hair, they both have very obvious curly-haired afro hairstyles, which was a popular hairstyle amongst both the Egyptians and quote-unquote Nubians in the ancient world. And even to this day, it's still stylish amongst the modern-day descendants of the ancient quote-unquote Nubians. Like this picture right here shows a modern-day Kushite or Nubian and an ancient Kushite or Nubian. And here's yet another depiction of an ancient and modern Kushite with the same hair that the Egyptians and Kushite soldiers and mercenaries had in the depiction that in the ancient relief depiction that I displayed. Let's just wrap this video up by defining what a Hamite is. So it says a descendant of biblical Ham, right? So tribes like the people of Kemet, the Canaanites, the Kushites, etc., those were all descendants of Ham. So they're all going to be included in what this definition is about to state. So reading on, see Hamitic with "ite," used in reference to Egyptians. So once again, the ancient Egyptians, both the northern and southern Egyptians, are included in this definition. But reading on, and other peoples of North and Northeast Africa, but popularly a black African, a Negro. Again, a black African, a Negro, is what a Hamite is. And the descendants of Ham include who? The ancient Egyptians, right? So the ancient Egyptians, as we should know for certain by now, or at least up until this point, were black African Negroes, just as this definition states right here. So that concludes this portion of the video series, and now we should have a better understanding of where the ancient Egyptians or Kemetic peoples originated from and what they looked like. But before I transition into the next video, I just want to state something that I've already said a multitude of times in this series already, but it will tie into what will be discussed in the next couple of videos, and then even the next couple of video series is down the line. But I just want to remind you guys of what I stated earlier about the ancient Egyptians and other black African peoples being of a similar stock to the so-called black man and black woman of the Americas and certain other parts of the world, but not being the exact same people as us. Oftentimes the confusion that exists amongst our people about where we descend from comes from this concept of us having melanin and other so-called black African races having quote-unquote melanin, as well as us looking similar to another ethnic group or race of people in terms of our phenotypes and genotypes, equaling us being the exact same people as them. And this is just not the case. Okay, just like how you would have a Japanese person and a Chinese person and a Vietnamese person or a Korean person, they may look very similar, but they will tell you if you ask them that they are not the exact same people. Okay, they may have derived from a similar stock, but there are cultural differences that exist between all of those nations of people. Same thing with cultures like the so-called Native Americans. They look very similar to one another, almost to the point where an alleged modern-day Seminole looks very similar to an alleged modern-day Mayan. And not to go off topic, but the reason why I say alleged Seminole and alleged Mayan is because those are not the descendants of the real Seminoles and Mayans. The people who claim to be the quote-unquote Seminoles and Mayans today, those are not the real descendants of the Seminoles and Mayans of the ancient world. But that'll be something for another day. But those people look the same. They're both of a similar, what's known as a quote-unquote Mongoloid stock, but their cultures are fundamentally disparate from one another. Okay, so that's something that the so-called black man and black woman who like to propose that the ancient Egyptians were black and we're black also, so that must mean that we're the ancient Egyptians. Okay, once again, all of the sons of Noah were so-called black, all of them. I mean, it doesn't make much sense for us to state that the ancient Egyptians were black, but the other descendants of Noah weren't, especially when we know that, for number one, his ancestor, Noah's ancestor, Adam, was a so-called black man, as I was able to show in my first video of this series, as well as Eve too. But also when you read Genesis, the 6th chapter and the 18th verse, it tells you that Noah had only one wife. So logically, if one child looks a certain way, like how Ham is depicted as looking like a so-called black man, then that must mean that the other children born of the exact same mother and father had to have looked just like him. Okay, they had to have looked just like they had to have looked just like Ham. Okay, and then the proof of this is, as I stated earlier, in the scriptures themselves. So we're going to take a look at this and address the ever controversial question: were the Israelites black people? Okay, along with proving that the Egyptians and the Israelites looked like one another, just like how a so-called black American man could be mistaken for a so-called black African man.